Oi, hello there, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. The 5th chapter, Polynesia. I think your house is the most interesting house I was ever in, I said as we set off in the direction of the town. May I come and see you again tomorrow? Certainly, said the doctor. Come any day you like. Tomorrow I'll send you the garden and my private zoo. Oh, tomorrow I'll show you the garden and my private zoo. Oh, you have a zoo? I asked. Yes, said he. The larger animals are too big for the house, so I keep them in a zoo in the garden. It is not a very big collection, but it is interesting in its way. It must be splendid, I said, to be able to talk to all the languages of the different animals. Do you think I could ever learn to do it? Oh, surely, said the doctor. With practice, you have to be very patient, you know. You really ought to have Polynesia to start you. It was she who gave me my first lesson. Who is Polynesia? I asked. Polynesia was a West African parrot I had. She isn't with me anymore now, said the doctor sadly. Why, is she dead? Oh no, said the doctor. She is still living, I hope. But when we reached Africa, she seemed so glad to get back to her own country. She wept for joy. And when the time came for me to come back here, I had not the heart to take her away from that sunny land, although it is true she did offer to come. I left her in Africa. Ah well, I have missed her terribly. She wept again when we left. But I think I did the right thing. She was one of the best friends I ever had. It was she who first gave me the idea of learning the animal languages and becoming an animal doctor. I often wonder if she remained happy in Africa, and whether I shall ever see her funny old solemn face again. Good old Polynesia, the most extraordinary bird. Well, well. Just at that moment, we heard the noise of someone running behind us. And turning round, we saw Jip the dog rushing down the road after us, as fast as his hind legs could bring him. He seemed very excited about something, and as soon as he came up to us, he started barking and whining to the doctor in a peculiar way. Then the doctor, too, seemed to get all worked up and began talking and making queer signs to the dog. At length he turned to me, his face shining with happiness. Polynesia has come back, he cried. Imagine it. Jip says she has just arrived at the house. My, and it's 5 years since I saw her. Excuse me a minute. He turned as if to go back home, but the parrot, Polynesia, was already flying towards us. The doctor clapped his hands like a child getting a new toy, while the swarm of sparrows in the roadway fluttered, gossiping up onto the fences, highly scandalized to see a grey and scarlet parrot skimming down an English lane. Oh, she came straight on to the doctor's shoulder, where she immediately began talking a steady stream in a language I could not understand. She seemed to have a terrible lot to say, and very soon the doctor had forgotten all about me and my squirrel, and Jip, and everything else, till at length the bird clearly asked him something about me. Oh, excuse me, Stubbins, said the doctor. I was so interested listening to my old friend here. We must get on and see this squirrel of yours. Polynesia, this is Thomas Stubbins. The parrot on the doctor's shoulder nodded gravely towards me, and then, to my great surprise, said quite plainly in English, "Well, how do you do? I remember the night you were born. It was a terribly cold winter. You were a very ugly baby. Stubbins is anxious to learn animal language, said the doctor. I was just telling him about you and the lessons you gave me when Jip ran up and told us you had arrived.
What? Well,
said the parrot, turning to me.
I may have started the doctor learning, but I never could have done even that if he hadn't first taught me to understand what I was saying when I spoke English. You see, many parrots can talk like a person, but very few of them understand what they are saying. They just say it because they fancy it is smart, or because they know they will get crackers given them. By this time we had turned and we were going towards my home, with Jip running in front and Polynesia still perched on the doctor's shoulder. The bird chattered incessantly, mostly about Africa, but now she spoke in English out of politeness to me. How is Prince Bumpo getting on? Asked the doctor. Oh, I'm glad you asked me,
said Polynesia.
I almost forgot to tell you.
What do you think?
Bumpo is in England.
In England? You don't say, cried the doctor. What on earth is he doing here?
His father, the king, sent him here to a place called Burlford. I think it was to study lessons.
Bulford, Bulford, muttered the doctor. I never heard of the place. Oh, you mean Oxford?
Yes, that's the place, Oxford,
said Polynesia.
I knew it had cattle in it somewhere. Oxford, that's the place he's gone to.
Well, good old Bumpo, murmured the doctor. Fancy Bumpo studying at Oxford. Well.
There were great doings in Jolinki when he left. He was scared to death to come. He was the first man from that country to go abroad. He thought he was going to be eaten by white cannibals or something. You know what those niggers are, that ignorant. Well, but his father made him come. He said that all the black kings were sending their sons to Oxford now. It was the fashion, and he would have to go. Bumpo wanted to bring his 6 wives with him, but the king wouldn't let him do that either. Poor Bumpo went off in tears, and everybody in the palace was crying too. You never heard such a hullabaloo.
Do you know if he ever went back in search of the Sleeping Beauty? Asked the doctor.
Oh, yes,
said Polynesia.
The day after you left, and a good thing for him he did, the king got to know about his helping you to escape, and he was dreadfully wild about it.
And the Sleeping Beauty, did he ever find her?
Well, he brought back something which he said was the Sleeping Beauty. Myself, I think it was an albino negress. She had red hair and the biggest feet you ever saw, but Bumpo was no end pleased with her, and finally married her amid great rejoicings. The feasting lasted 7 days, and she became his chief wife and is now known out there as the Crown Princess Boompa. You accent the last syllable.
And tell me, did he remain white?
For only about 3 months, said the parrot. After that, his face slowly returned to its natural color. It was just as well. He was so conspicuous in his bathing suit the way he was, with his face white and the rest of him black.
And how is Chi-Chi getting on? Chi-Chi, added the doctor in explanation to me, was a pet monkey I had years ago. I left him in Africa when I came away.
Well, said Polynesia, frowning, Chi-Chi is not entirely happy. I saw a good deal of him in the last few years. He got dreadfully homesick for you, and the house and the garden. It's funny, but I was just the same way myself. You remember how crazy I was to get back to the dear old land? And Africa is a wonderful country. I don't care what anybody says. Well, I thought I was going to have a perfectly grand time. But somehow, I don't know, after a few weeks it seemed to get tiresome. I just couldn't seem to settle down. Well, to make a long story short, one night I made up my mind that I'd come back here and find you, so I hunted up old Chi-Chi and told him about it. He said he didn't blame me a bit. I felt exactly the same way himself. Africa was so deadly quiet after the life we had led with you. He missed the stories you used to tell us out of your animal books and the chats we used to have sitting round the kitchen fire on winter nights. The animals out there were very nice to us and all that, but somehow the dear kind creatures seemed a bit stupid. Chi-Chi said he had noticed it too, but I suppose it wasn't they who had changed. It was we who were different. When I left, poor old Chi-Chi broke down and cried. He said he felt as though his only friend were leaving him, though, as you know, he has simply millions of relatives there. He said it didn't seem fair that I should have wings to fly over here any time I liked, and him with no way to follow me. But mark my words, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he found a way to come someday. He's a smart lad, is Chi-Chi. At this point, we arrived at my home. My father's shop was closed and the shutters were up. But my mother was standing at the door looking down the street. "Good evening, Mrs. Stubbins," said the doctor. "It is my fault your son is so late. I made him stay to supper while his clothes were drying. He was soaked to the skin, and so was I. We ran into one another in the storm, and I insisted on his coming into my house for shelter." "I was beginning to get worried about him," said my mother. "I am thankful to you, sir, for looking after him so well and bringing him home." Don't mention it," said the doctor. "We have had a very interesting chat." "Who might it be that I have the honor of addressing?" asked my mother, staring at the grey parrot perched on the doctor's shoulder. "Oh, I'm John Dolittle. I dare say your husband will remember me. He made me some very excellent boots about 4 years ago. They really are splendid," added the doctor, gazing down at his feet with great satisfaction. The doctor has come to cure my squirrel, mother," said I. "He knows all about animals." "Oh, no," said the doctor. "Not all, Stubbins. Not all about them, by any means." "It is very kind of you to come so far to look after his pet," said my mother. "Tom is always bringing home strange creatures from the woods and the fields." "Is he now?" said the doctor. "Perhaps he will grow up to be a naturalist some day. Who knows?" "Won't you come in?" asked my mother. "The place is a little untidy because I haven't finished the spring cleaning yet, but there's a nice fire burning in the parlour." "Thank you," said the doctor. "What a charming home you have." And after wiping his enormous boots very, very carefully on the mat, the great man passed into the house. The 6th chapter. The Wounded Squirrel. Inside, we found my father busy practicing on the flute beside the fire. This he always did, every evening after his work was over. The doctor immediately began talking to him about flutes and piccolos and bassoons, and presently my father said, "Perhaps you perform upon the flute yourself, sir? Won't you play us a tune?" "Well," said the doctor, "it is a long time since I touched the instrument, but I would like to try. May I?" Then the doctor took the flute from my father and played and played and played. It was wonderful. My mother and father sat as still as statues, staring up at the ceiling as though they were in church, and even I
who didn't bother much about music except on the mouth organ, even I felt all sad and cold and creepy and wished I had been a better boy.
"Oh, I think that was just beautiful,"
sighed my mother, when at length the doctor stopped.
"You are a great musician, sir,"
said my father. A very great musician? Won't you please play us something else? Why, certainly, said the doctor. Oh, but look here, I've forgotten all about the squirrel. I'll show him to you, I said. He is upstairs in my room. So I led the doctor to my bedroom at the top of the house and showed him the squirrel in the packing case filled with straw. The animal, who had always seemed very much afraid of me, though I had tried hard to make him feel at home, sat up at once when the doctor came into the room and started to chatter. The doctor chattered back in the same way, and the squirrel, when he was lifted up to have his leg examined, appeared to be rather pleased, then frightened. I held a candle while the doctor tied the leg up in what he called splints, which he made out of matchsticks with his penknife. I think you will find that his leg will get better now in a very short time, said the doctor, closing up his bag. Don't let him run about for at least 2 weeks yet, but keep him in the open air and cover him up with dry leaves if the nights get cool. He tells me he is rather lonely here all by himself and is wondering how his wife and children are getting on. I have assured him you are a man to be trusted, and I will send a squirrel who lives in my garden to find out how his family are and to bring him news of them. He must be kept cheerful at all costs. Squirrels are naturally a very cheerful, active race. It is very hard for them to lie still, doing nothing. But you needn't worry about him. He will be all right. Then we went back again to the parlour, and my mother and father kept him playing the flute till after 10 o'clock. Although my parents both liked the doctor tremendously from the first moment that they saw him, and were very proud to have him come and play to us, for we were really terribly poor, they did not realize then what a truly great man he was one day to become. Of course now, when almost everybody in the whole world has heard about Dr. Dolittle and his books, if you were to go to that little house in Puddleby, where my father had his cobbler's shop, you would see, set in the wall over the old-fashioned door, a stone with writing on it which says, John Dolittle, the famous naturalist, played the flute in this house in the year 1839. I often look back upon that night long ago, and if I close my eyes and think hard, I can see that parlour just as it was then. A funny little man in coat-tails with a round, kind face, playing away on the flute in front of the fire. My mother on one side of him and my father on the other, holding their breath and listening with their eyes shut. Myself with Jip squatting on the carpet at his feet, staring into the coals, and Polynesia perched on the mantelpiece beside his shabby high hat, gravely swinging her head from side to side in time to the music. I see it all, just as though it were before me now. And then I remember how, after we had seen the doctor out at the front door, we all came back into the parlour and talked about him till it was still later. And even after I did go to bed, I had never stayed up so late in my life before. I dreamed about him and a band of strange, clever animals that played flutes and fiddles and drums the whole night through. The 7th chapter, Shellfish Talk. The next morning, although I had gone to bed so late the night before, I was up frightfully early. The first sparrows were just beginning to chirp sleepily in the slates outside my attic window when I jumped out of bed and scrambled into my clothes. I could hardly wait to get back to the little house with the big green garden to see the doctor and his private zoo. For the first time in my life, I forgot all about breakfast and creeping down the stairs on tiptoe so as not to wake my mother and father. I opened the front door and popped out into the empty, silent street. When I got to the doctor's gate, I suddenly thought that perhaps I was too early to call on anyone, and I began to wonder if the doctor would be up yet. I looked into the garden. No one seemed to be about, so I opened the gate quietly and went inside. As I turned to the left to go down a path between some hedges, I heard a voice quite close to me say,
"What? Good morning. How early you are." What?
I turned around, and there, sitting on the top of a privet hedge, was the grey parrot, Polynesia. "Good morning," I said. "I suppose I am rather early. Is the doctor still in bed?"
"Oh no," said
Polynesia.
"He has been up an hour and a half. You'll find him in the house somewhere. The front door is open. Just push it and go in. He is sure to be in the kitchen cooking breakfast or working in his study. Walk right in. I am waiting to see the sun rise, but upon my word, I believe it's forgotten to rise. It is an awful climate, this. Now, if we were in Africa, the world would be blazing with sunlight at this hour of the morning. Just see that mist rolling over those cabbages. It is enough to give you rheumatism to look at. Beastly climate, beastly. Really, I don't know why anything but frogs ever stay in England. Well, don't let me keep you. Run along and see the doctor."
"Thank you," I said. "I'll go and look for him." When I opened the front door, I could smell bacon frying, so I made my way to the kitchen. There I discovered a large kettle boiling away over the fire and some bacon and eggs in a dish upon the hearth. It seemed to me that the bacon was getting all dried up with the heat, so I pulled the dish a little further away from the fire and went on through the house looking for the doctor. I found him at last in the study. I did not know then that it was called the study. It was certainly a very interesting room with telescopes and microscopes and all sorts of other strange things which I did not understand about, but wished I did. Hanging on the walls were pictures of animals and fishes and strange plants and collections of birds' eggs and seashells in glass cases. The doctor was standing at the main table in his dressing gown. At first I thought he was washing his face. He had a square glass box before him full of water. He was holding one ear under the water while he covered the other with his left hand. And as I came in, he stood up. "Good morning, Stubbins," said he. "Going to be a nice day, don't you think? I've just been listening to the whiff-waff, but he is very disappointing, very." "Why?" I said. "Didn't you find that he has any language at all?" "Oh, yes," said the doctor. "He has a language, but it is such a poor language. Only a few words like yes or no, hot and cold. That's all he can say. It's very rather disappointing, I might say. You see, he really belongs to two different families of fishes. I thought he was going to be tremendously helpful. Well, I suppose," said I, "that means he hasn't very much sense, if his language is only 2 or 3 words." "Yes, I suppose it does. Possibly it is the kind of life he leads. You see, they are very rare now, these whiff-waffs. Very rare and very solitary. They swim around in the deepest parts of the ocean entirely by themselves, always alone, so I presume they really don't need to talk much." "Perhaps some kind of a bigger shellfish would talk more," I said. "After all, he is very small, isn't he?" "Yes," said the doctor. "That's true. Oh, I have no doubt that there are shellfish who are good talkers, not the least doubt. But the big shellfish, the biggest of them, are hard to catch. They are only to be found in the deep parts of the sea, and as they don't swim very much, but just crawl along the floor of the ocean most of the time, they are very seldom taken in nets. I do wish I could find some way of going down to the bottom of the sea. I could learn a lot if I could only do that. But we are forgetting all about breakfast. Have you had breakfast yet, Stubbins? I told the doctor that I'd forgotten all about it, and he at once led the way into the kitchen. Yes, he said, as he poured the hot water from the kettle into the teapot. If a man could only manage to get right down to the bottom of the sea and live there a while, he would discover some wonderful things, things that people have never dreamed of. But men do go down, don't they? I asked. Divers and people like that. Oh yes, to be sure, said the doctor. Divers go down. I've been down myself in a diving suit, for that matter. But they only go where the sea is shallow. Divers can't go down where it is really deep. What I would like to do is to go down to the great depths, where it is miles deep. Well, I dare say I shall manage it some day. Let me give you another cup of tea. The 8th chapter. Are you a good noticer? Just at that moment, Polynesia came into the room and said something to the doctor in bird language. Of course, I did not understand what it was, but the doctor at once put down his knife and fork and left the room.
You know it is an awful shame,
said the parrot, as soon as the doctor had closed the door.
Directly he comes back home, all the animals over the whole countryside get to hear of it, and every sick cat and mangy rabbit for miles around comes to see him and ask his advice. Now, there's a big fat hare outside at the back door with a squawking baby. Can she see the doctor, please? Thinks it's going to have convulsions. Stupid little thing's been eating deadly nightshade again, I suppose. The animals are so inconsiderate at times, especially the mothers. They come round and call the doctor away from his meals and wake him up out of his bed at all hours of the night. I don't know how he stands it. Really, I don't. Why, the poor man never gets any peace at all. I've told him time and time again to have special hours for the animals to come, but he is so frightfully kind and considerate. He never refuses to see them if there is anything really wrong with them. He says the urgent cases must be seen at once.
Why don't some of the animals go and see the other doctors? I asked.
Oh, good gracious!
Exclaimed the parrot, tossing her head scornfully.
Why, there aren't any other animal doctors, not real doctors.
Oh, of course, there are those vet persons, to be sure, but bless you, they're no good. You see, they can't understand the animal's language, so how can you expect them to be any use? Imagine yourself, or your father, going to see a doctor who could not understand a word you say, nor even tell you in your own language what you must do to get well. Poof! Those vets, they're that stupid, you've no idea. But the doctor's bacon down by the fire, will you? Put the doctor's bacon down by the fire, will you? To keep hot till he comes back. Do you think I would ever be able to learn the language of the animals? I asked, laying the plate upon the hearth.
Well, it all depends, said Polynesia. Are you clever at lessons?
I don't know, I answered, feeling rather ashamed. You see, I've never been to school. My father is too poor to send me.
Well, said the parrot, I don't suppose you have really missed much to judge from what I have seen of schoolboys. But listen, are you a good noticer? Do you notice things well? I mean, for instance, Supposing you saw two cock starlings on an apple tree, and you only took one good look at them. Would you be able to tell one from the other if you saw them again the next day?
I don't know, I said. I've never tried.
Well, that,
said Polynesia, brushing some crumbs off the corner of the table with her left foot.
That is what you call powers of observation. Noticing the small things about birds and animals, the way they walk and move their heads and flip their wings, the way they sniff the air and twitch their whiskers and wiggle their tails. You have to notice all those little things if you want to learn animal language. For you see, lots of the animals hardly talk at all with their tongues. They use their breath or their tails or their feet instead. That is because many of them in the olden days were lions and tigers. That is because many of them in the olden days, when lions and tigers were more plentiful, were afraid to make a noise for fear the savage creatures heard them. Birds, of course, didn't care, for they always had wings to fly away with. But that is the first thing to remember. Being a good noticer is terribly important in learning animal language.
It sounds pretty hard, I said.
You'll have to be very patient,
said Polynesia. It takes a long time to say even a few words properly.
But if you come here often, I'll give you a few lessons myself. And once you get started, you'll be surprised how fast you get on.
It would indeed be a good thing if you could learn,
because then you could do some of the work for the doctor. I mean, the easier work, like bandaging and giving pills.
Yes, that's a good idea of mine. Could be a great thing if the poor man could get some help and some rest.
It is a scandal the way he works. I see no reason why you shouldn't be able to help him in a great deal. That is, if you are really interested in animals.
Oh, I'd love that, I cried. Do you think the doctor would let me?
Certainly, said Polynesia. As soon as you have learned something about doctoring, I'll speak of it to him myself. Shh, I hear him coming. Quick, bring his bacon back onto the table.
The 9th chapter, The Garden of Dreams. When breakfast was over, the doctor took me out to show me the garden. Well, if the house had been interesting, the garden was 100 times more so. Of all the gardens I have ever seen, that was the most delightful. Of all the gardens I have ever seen, that was the most delightful, the most fascinating. At first you did not realize how big it was. You never seemed to come to the end of it. When at last you were quite sure that you had seen it all, you would peer over a hedge, or turn a corner, or look up some steps, and there was a whole new part you never expected to find. It had everything a garden can have, or ever has had. There were wide lawns with carved stone seats, green with moss. Over the lawns hung weeping willows, and their feathery bow tips brushed the velvet grass when they swung with the wind. The old flagged paths had high clipped yew hedges either side of them, so that they looked like the narrow streets of some old town. And through the hedges doorways had been made, and over the doorways were shapes like faces and peacocks and half moons all trimmed out of the living trees. There was a lovely marble fish pond with golden carp and blue water lilies in it, and big green frogs. A high brick wall alongside the kitchen garden was all covered with pink and yellow peaches ripening in the sun. There was a wonderful great oak, hollow in the trunk, big enough for 4 men to hide inside. Many summer houses there were, too, some of wood and some of stone. And one of them was full of books to read. In a corner, among some rocks and ferns, was an outdoor fireplace, where the doctor used to fry liver and bacon when he had a notion to take his meals in the open air. There was a couch as well on which he used to sleep. It seems on warm summer nights when the nightingales were singing at their best, it had wheels on it so it could be moved about under any tree they sang in. But the thing that fascinated me most of all was a tiny little tree house, high up in the top branches of a great elm with a long rope ladder leading to it. The doctor told me he used it for looking at the moon and the stars through a telescope. It was the kind of a garden where you could wander and explore for days and days, always coming upon something new, always glad to find the old spots over again. That first time that I saw the doctor's garden, I was so charmed by it that I felt I would like to live in it, always, and never go outside of it again. For it had everything within its walls to give happiness, to make living pleasant, to keep the heart at peace. It was the Garden of Dreams. One peculiar thing I noticed immediately I came into, and that was what a lot of birds there were about. Every tree seemed to have 2 or 3 nests in it, and heaps of other wild creatures appeared to be making themselves at home there too. Stoats and tortoises and dormice seemed to be quite common, and not in the least shy. Toads of different colours and sizes hopped about the lawn as though it belonged to them. Green lizards, which were very rare in Puddleby, sat up on the stones in the sunlight and blinked at us. Even snakes were to be seen. "You need not be afraid of them," said the doctor, noticing that I started somewhat when a large black snake wiggled across the path right in front of us. "These fellows are not poisonous. They do a great deal of good in keeping down many kinds of garden pests. I play the flute to them sometimes in the evening. They love it. Stand right up on their tails and carry on no end. Funny thing, their taste for music." "Why do all these animals come and live here?" I asked. "I never saw a garden with so many creatures in it." "Well, I suppose it's because they get the kind of food they like, and nobody worries or disturbs them. And then, of course, they know me. And if they or their children get sick, I presume they find it handy to be living in a doctor's garden. Look, you see that sparrow on the sundial, swearing at the blackbird down below? Well, he has been coming here every summer for years. He comes from London. The country sparrows round about here are always laughing at him, and they say he chirps with such a Cockney accent. He is a most amusing bird, very brave, but very cheeky. He loves nothing better than an argument, but he always ends it by getting rude. He is a real city bird. In London he lives around St. Paul's Cathedral. Cheapside, we call him." "Are all these birds from the country round here?" I asked. "Most of them," said the doctor, "but a few rare ones visit me every year who ordinarily never come near England at all. For instance, that handsome little fellow hovering over the snapdragon there, he's a ruby-throated hummingbird, comes from America. Strictly speaking, he has no business in this climate at all. It is too cool. I make him sleep in the kitchen at night. Then every August, about the last week of the month, I have a purple bird of paradise come all the way from Brazil to see me. She is a very great swell. Hasn't arrived yet, of course, and there are a few others, foreign birds, from the tropics mostly, who drop in on me in the course of the summer months. But come, I must show you the zoo." The 10th chapter, The Private Zoo. I did not think there could be anything left in that garden which we had not seen, but the doctor took me by the arm and started off down a little narrow path, and after many windings and twistings and turnings, we found ourselves before a small door in a high stone wall. The doctor pushed it open. Inside was still another garden. I had expected to find cages with animals inside them, but there were none to be seen. Instead, there were little stone houses here and there all over the garden, and each house had a window and a door. As we walked in, many of these doors opened and animals came running out to see us, evidently expecting food. "Haven't the doors any locks on them?" I asked the doctor. "Oh yes," he said. "Every door has a lock. But in my zoo, the doors open from the inside, not from the out. The locks are only there so the animals can go and shut themselves in any time they want to get away from the annoyance of other animals or from people who might come here. Every animal in this zoo stays here because he likes it, not because he is made to." "They all look very happy and clean," I said. "Would you mind telling me the names of some of them?" "Certainly. Well now, that funny-looking thing with plates on his back, nosing under the brick over there, is a South American armadillo. The little chap talking to him is a Canadian woodchuck. They both live in those holes you see at the foot of the wall. The two little beasts doing antics in the pond are a pair of Russian minks. And that reminds me, I must go and get them some herrings from the town before noon. It is early closing today. That animal just stepping out of his house is an antelope, one of the smaller South African kinds. Now let us move to the other side of those bushes there, and I will show you some more." "Are those deer over there?" I asked. "Deer," said the doctor. "Where do you mean?" "Over there," I said, pointing, "nibbling the grass border of the bed. There are two of them." "Oh, that," said the doctor with a smile. "That isn't two animals. That's one animal with two heads. The only two-headed animal in the world. It's called the Push-me-pull-you. I brought him from Africa. He's very tame, acts as a kind of night watchman for my zoo. He only sleeps with one head at a time, you see. Very handy. The other head stays awake all night." "Have you any lions or tigers?" I asked as we moved on. "No," said the doctor. "It wouldn't be possible to keep them here, and I wouldn't keep them even if I could. If I had my way, Stubbins, there wouldn't be a single lion or tiger in captivity anywhere in the world. They never take to it, they're never happy, they never settle down. They are always thinking of the big countries that they have left behind. You can see it in their eyes, dreaming always of the great open spaces where they were born, dreaming of the deep, dark jungles where their mothers first taught them how to scent and track the deer." "And what are they given in exchange for all this?" asked the doctor, stopping in his walk and growing all red and angry. "What are they given in exchange for the glory of an African sunrise, for the twilight breeze whispering through the palms, for the green shade of the matted tangled vines, for the cool big-starred nights of the desert, for the patter of the waterfall after a hard day's hunt? What, I ask you, are they given in exchange for these? Why, a bare cage with iron bars, an ugly piece of dead meat thrust into them once a day, and a crowd of fools to come and stare at them with open mouths. No, Stubbins, lions and tigers, the big hunters, should never be seen in zoos." The doctor seemed to have grown terribly serious, almost sad, but suddenly his manner changed again, and he took me by the arm with his same old cheerful smile. "But we haven't seen the butterfly houses yet, nor the aquariums. Come along, I am very proud of my butterfly houses." Off we went again, and came presently into a hedged enclosure. Here I saw several big huts made of fine wire netting, like cages. Inside the netting, all sorts of beautiful flowers were growing in the sun, with butterflies skimming over them. The doctor pointed to the end of one of the huts where little boxes with holes in them stood in a row. "Those are the hatching boxes," said he. "There I put the different kinds of caterpillars, and as soon as they turn into butterflies and moths, they come out into these flower gardens to feed. Do butterflies have a language? I asked. Oh, I fancy they have, said the doctor. And the beetles too. But so far I haven't succeeded in learning much about insect languages. I've been too busy lately trying to master the shellfish talk. I mean to take it up, though. At that moment, Polynesia joined us and said,
What? Doctor, there are 2 guinea pigs at the back door. They say they have run away from the boy who kept them because they didn't get the right stuff to eat. They want to know if you will take them in.
All right, said the doctor. Show them the way to the zoo. Give them the house on the left, near the gate. The one the black fox had. Tell them what the rules are and give them a square meal. Now, Stubbins, we will go on to the aquariums. And first of all, I must show you my big glass seawater tank where I keep the shellfish.